And Pete Prisco joins us now along with Brady Quinn. Let's start with Lamar Jackson, Pete. Why aren't you worried that if the Ravens tag him, because I know you believe that the Ravens should tag him, why aren't you worried that he would sit out and miss some games?
Because he hasn't made a lot of money in his career, and guys aren't going to leave $32 million on the table. Now, what he could do is or $45 million if it's the exclusive tag. What he could do is decide not to show up for any of the off-season work and just walk in when it's time to play games.
Does that really matter?
It matters. You got a new offensive coordinator. You'd like to see him around. Todd Monken's going to put a new system in. I think you'd like to see him there. But I think ultimately, though, the Ravens are going to be smart enough and realize you can't allow him to leave. If you don't have him, what do you do to solve that position? You're going to be like every other team out there looking for a quarterback.
Huntley's a Pro Bowler.
Oh, stop. Oh, stop. But so I think they'll put the tag on him. Again, I've said this many a time. What I would do is I'd put the non-exclusive tag on him. And when you do that, it forces another team to do your negotiating for you. Because the Ravens are having a tough time negotiating with him. He's the player. They got to tell him, you're not good enough. You don't show up at the end of the year. We're not going to give you that guaranteed contract. Whereas if another team does the deal, then you can match it. Then all of a sudden you're off the hook for the negotiation. If you don't want to match it, if say they gave him all that guaranteed money in the contract that he wants, like Deshaun Watson, then you get 2 first-round picks for him.
Here's the problem with that, Pete, is I don't put Lamar Jackson in the same category as Daniel Jones and Geno Smith, who I think probably warrant the non-exclusive franchise tag if they can't come to a long-term agreement, which it seems like that's where this is headed. Lamar Jackson's been a league MVP. There's no questions about whether or not he's a winner when he's in there starting and playing for the Baltimore Ravens. So, for me, I think he warrants putting the exclusive franchise tag on him to give him that $45 million per year. Then you can see if you can't work out a long-term deal. And then hopefully in that span of time, you get some other quarterbacks who sign extensions that will get away from the thinking that Lamar Jackson is ever going to receive anything close to the Deshaun Watson deal. I think that's the concern here, is every single team now is looking at the Cleveland Browns saying, why do you put this in this situation where you give Deshaun Watson, after a year out of football, a $230 total guaranteed contract? And Steve Bisciotti was saying that back when that time happened. He knew that was going to play a factor into the Lamar Jackson negotiations. It still has to some degree. And I think as more quarterbacks sign deals, hopefully it won't become as big of a point of contention between Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens moving forward. So I'm with you. He's going to get tagged, but I think the exclusive franchise tag is more what he deserves in this case.
Oh, it's what he deserves. I'm just saying it gives you an out so you don't have to negotiate the deal and allow somebody else to do that. The other thing about that is this contract's being watched by everybody in the NFL. If, for example, they do decide to give him a fully guaranteed deal, which is what he wants, then all of a sudden Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, they're all in line for that as well. So this could be a game changer for the rest of the NFL if he does get the fully guaranteed deal.
Lamar Jackson is on top of Pete Prisco's top 100 free agent list. Derek Carr is right behind him. We'll talk more about Derek Carr a little bit later, but let's go to the top defensive player on your list, Pete. It's Eagles defensive tackle Javon Hargrave. Should the Eagles tag him? They got so many free agents, 10 in your top 100.
Yeah, I don't think they will tag him. And would I tag him? Probably not. And here's why. He's not a young kid anymore, but he can still play at a high level. But when you look at the Eagles, you drafted a guy last year in Jordan Davis. You expect him to come in. And he started off well this year, got hurt, came back, didn't play as well. But you expect him to be a quality starting defensive tackle for you. So you also have 2 first-round picks in this draft, so you can supplement that as well. Milton Williams is another guy to keep an eye on. They like him as a backup defensive tackle. So I don't think they will tag him, which means he's probably going to get out on the open market, and I think that's a good thing for Javon Hargrave because he had a great year last year with 11 sacks. He can push the pocket, and he's also good against the run.
He was really the interior defensive player, Pete, that stood out. It was Javon Hargrave. It wasn't Fletcher Cox. That being said, though, it's not really the route that I think Howie Roseman and the Philadelphia Eagles want to go with using the franchise tag. Especially if that number tends to be a high cap hit. So in this case, you allow Javon Hargrave to go out and test the waters, knowing that you're a team that just won the NFC Championship. You went to a Super Bowl. Maybe that's enough to entice him to want to come back. It seems like Nick Sirianni and Howie Roseman have built a culture there where maybe they can sign some of these veteran guys like we saw them do during the course of the season. Guys like Ndamukong Suh and Linval Joseph are obviously willing to want to sign there, knowing what that team was capable of doing. So I think because of all the pieces that this Eagles team has, that's arguably one of the most talented rosters this past season, it lends itself to the possibility Javon Hargrave might say, maybe I want to come back to a team that maybe isn't going to pay me top dollar, but I know is going to have a chance to compete for a Super Bowl. That is one line of thinking for a guy that is now turned 30 and is getting the back end of his career.
Eagles with a NFL high 10 players on Pete's top 100 list, 5 of them in the top 25. So, Pete, if you're not tagging Hargrave, if you think he's going to get away, who do you think about tagging, and who do you really prioritize on this list if you're Philadelphia?
I probably don't tag any of them, to be honest with you. And I think you look at the bottom of that group, Fletcher Cox is up in the years. Brandon Graham is up in the years, although he played really well last year. The guy I would try and keep would be Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. I think he gives you so much flexibility on defense. He allows you to, he plays free safety, but he can also play down when you need him to play down, which he's done before in the slot. And so that would be one guy. I think, Bradbury, where was the market for Bradbury last year? There wasn't much of one. So I think obviously he's a guy you might be able to keep and not on an expensive deal. The rest of those, TJ Edwards is a good player, didn't show up in the Super Bowl. I was disappointed in him. I loved him all year. And the right guard's a good player, but this is a team that drafts and develops. I think they can replace him as well.
Outside of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, I'd look at Jason Kelce. I mean, look, he is, obviously the leader of that offensive line. That's the best in the NFL. If you can convince him to come back for another year, I think that's a huge piece in helping solidify that group up front that helped you be able to run the football effectively and obviously protect Jalen Hurts. So Jason Kelce is another guy you got to keep in mind. But again, we knew there was talk potentially of him maybe retiring. We'll see how much more football he wants to play. But in my opinion, he's a future Hall of Famer, and he's a guy that I think you got to figure out a way of getting back on the roster.
Yeah, and I think if he wants to play, he's going to go back to Philadelphia. Here's the other thing. They drafted to replace him. They drafted Cam Jurgens last year. They love Cam Jurgens. So if Kelce did decide to retire, they have a guy that's ready to play.
Elsewhere in that division, you have the New York Giants. Go ahead, Brady. Sorry to cut you off there.
You could also put Jurgens at an interior offensive lineman spot for Suamalo if Suamalo ends up moving on to free agency and doesn't sign back too.
Now, Philadelphia, with all these free agents, the Giants have 2 big ones, Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley. For Barkley, he's in your top 5. Jones, I think you have 9th, and we'll talk about him a little bit later. Barkley specifically, why do you have him top 5? Because we know how you feel about running backs, and what are you willing to pay if you're a team that wants him?
Oh, I'm tagging him. I'm gonna pay. My ideal scenario if I'm the Giants.
But what if you have to tag Jones?
Then I'm going to try and keep him to $10, $12 million, $13 million a year at the most. I'm not going above that. Look, the days of the Wild Wild West contracts for the running backs are over. Todd Gurley, I hate to bring that name up on this show, but Todd Gurley got a big deal.
You ended his career.
You did.
You said he had a degenerative knee.
You did.
And then nobody signed him again.
And it didn't work out for him. David Johnson didn't work out for him. Melvin Gordon didn't work out for him. Zeke Elliott hasn't worked out for him. The days of the big contracts are over for these running backs, but he's still a really big part of what the Giants do. If I'm the Giants, I find a way to sign Daniel Jones, and then I tag Saquon Barkley.
I don't think it's going to work out that way, though, Pete. I mean, you and I both know, as you always say, you could find running backs on trees. I mean, you could look at this New York Giants team and their draft picks this upcoming draft and say they could find someone in Bijan Robinson who's got a very similar skill set. If you're going by per game, per rush average has actually been more productive than Saquon Barkley was back when he was coming out of Penn State. And so Bijan Robinson would be a great fit for the Giants if you were to let Saquon Barkley go into free agency. We could still use that tag on Daniel Jones because it sounds like it's pretty clear Daniel Jones wants that $45 million per year, and it seems like the Giants are more looking at the non-exclusive franchise tag to use on Daniel Jones in a manner that's going to be very similar to what you talked about. Let the rest of the league come out and bid for Daniel Jones if they want him. And look, if you don't want to match that, great. You get 2 first-round picks in exchange. You can go find Daniel Jones' replacement. But I think that's where this is headed for the New York Giants. I think a non-exclusive franchise tag for Jones. And Saquon Barkley is going to hit free agency. And then it's up to him to decide whether or not he would want to come back and sign back with the Giants or where there's going to potentially be greener pastures.
Where's the greener pastures, though, if you're Saquon Barkley and you hit the market? I mean, where do you get that big? You're not getting a big money deal, so you're better off if you get a decent deal from the Giants, go back to the Giants if it plays out that way.
The high water mark is $16 million, which was the deal that Christian McCaffrey did back when he was with the Carolina Panthers. Now, mind you, I believe he signed that contract somewhere around 24, 25. Barkley's more on the older end of the spectrum as far as running backs looking to hit this next deal, where I believe he's closer to 26. But Alvin Kamara, some of the running backs that fall into that category all signed those extensions or bigger deals a couple years younger. So to your point, Pete, I think average annual value is probably somewhere in the ballpark of $12 million per year. And in large part because of the variety of ways in which you can use Saquon Barkley. If he was just solely a running back that isn't capable of catching the ball out of the backfield, it might be a different story. But he is a very capable catcher out of the backfield, and I think that's one of the reasons why he could warrant, at least as far as the first 2 years of his deal, getting roughly about $12 million per year, probably $24-30 million in guarantees on whatever contract he'd sign as a free agent.
He did just turn 26 years old in February. Let's move on to the team with the most projected cap space, and that would be the Chicago Bears, who have a ton of holes. When you look at this list and the players who may become available, who should the Bears go after with that $100 million of space?
Well, I think when you look at their team and the way it's made up, you can look at it and say they can go anywhere because they need so many guys. I mean, you look across the board, they need some help at pass rush, they need linebackers, they need guys who can protect the quarterback. And I think Mike McGlinchey, and look, I've been critical of Mike McGlinchey at times. He was the spinning top 1 week, and Brady got mad because he was a Notre Dame guy, picked on him. But Mike McGlinchey is a good right tackle. I think the right tackle position's been a problem for the Bears. I think that's a guy you could go after, maybe plug and play him at right tackle, improve your offensive line. Remember, if you're going to stick with Justin Fields, you have to get better around him. I would stick with Justin Fields. I would build that team around him. You have to give the quarterback a chance to compete. Last year was a disaster. Get Mike McGlinchey, put him in at right tackle.
Yeah, we'll get to that later on in the D block, Pete. So thanks for foreshadowing my pick for where Mike McGlinchey would be the best fit. But I think you have to look for some playmakers to help out Justin Fields. That's what this roster is devoid of as far as targets for Justin Fields to throw to. So whether it's Jacoby Myers, who's had a very productive career during his time with the New England Patriots, Darius Slayton, who'd be another guy who comes to mind as far as bigger downfield, big playability. Those two guys in particular, I think, would be very much needed for a Bears offense that lacks the ability to have separation at the wide receiver position. So I don't know if we could show your entire 100 free agent list, but those were two of the guys on it I think would make a lot of sense for the Bears.
Yeah, you can check CBSSports.com for the entire 100-player list, and if you're the Bears, you could probably add about 40 of them the way their roster looks right now. Let's go to a couple hidden gems that the guys have picked out from this list of 100. Pete, who do you like kind of sitting in the weeds? Not a top 10 guy, but somebody who could make a big difference next year.
Zach Allen, the defensive end for the Arizona Cardinals. And last year he was outstanding. And, a lot of that has to do with the fact, I think, that J.J. Watt kind of rubbed off on him. J.J. Watt does everything the right way, and when you're a defensive end and you watch him do things and see the way he plays and prepares, I think Zach Allen learned from J.J. Watt and responded with his best season. I mean, he's a good defensive end. He's never going to be one of those guys that's going to get 15 sacks, 13 sacks, but he might bitch you 8, 9, 10 and be a productive player as a down defensive end. So I like Zach Allen. I think he's a sleeper in this free agency class.
I like this pick, Pete. Having a chance to call one of the Cardinals games this year, they were extremely high on Zach Allen. That was one of the players they talked about, hoping that they could keep on the roster and sign back for a longer-term deal. I'm going to stay with the Cardinals, though. I'm going to go with Byron Murphy, another player that you have on your list here. You talked about his versatility in your article, how he can play inside and outside. I just think overall he's a very solid cornerback, and at 25 years old, he's still in the prime of his career. So he's another player that I think if you're looking at continuing to build in your secondary with a player that can match up with some of the best wide receivers in the NFL, Byron Murphy is a guy that makes a lot of sense to me. I think, even just outside of being able to play inside and outside, he's good in zone, he's good in man. He can play in a bunch of different concepts and coverages too. So Byron Murphy to me is going to be a big help to whatever team he gets added to.
Much more top 100 free agent talk here this hour on CBS Sports HQ. Want to remind you that you can get your NFL fix all the time with Brinson, Wilson, and Breach. Latest episode of the Pick 6 podcast discussing which team in each division needs the most help this offseason. Pete Prisco is here. Brady Quinn is there. I'm Chris Hassel. We have talked at length about Daniel Jones. Haven't talked as much about Geno Smith, I feel. After a career year, great passing percentage, kept them in the playoff race all season long. Geno 10 spots below Daniel Jones. Is that just because of his age?
Well, I think age has a lot to do with it. And again, when you look at what Geno did last year, you got to give him a ton of credit. He was fantastic. The question becomes, and I think it's similar for Daniel Jones, is can they do it again? And so I wonder from that standpoint. I love what Geno did. He was fantastic. He earned the right to be in this spot, which is high for a quarterback, free agent quarterback, I think. when you look at it. So kudos to him. I just have to see it. Plus, the age is a factor. I mean, 32 is a big difference between 26 and 32 if you think one of them is going to be a franchise quarterback going forward.
No, I definitely get that moving forward. That was going to be my question to you, Pete, is why is he so far behind Daniel Jones, given how he had that much better of a year than Daniel Jones? I mean, maybe you say Daniel Jones didn't have quite the supporting cast, and that's part of it. Whatever the case may be, I think both these players set up well for the non-exclusive franchise tag, where you have the opportunity to let the rest of the teams in the NFL decide really what that long-term contract could be worth. And, if not, so be it. He gets a chance to prove it again for another year on what is a pretty solid 1-year guaranteed deal that's going to pay him a decent lump sum of money. So a lot of credit needs to be given for Geno Smith for being patient, continuing to improve his game while he was out, and really striking at the opportunity that Pete Carroll and the Seahawks were able to give him. But as far as how this is going to shake out with Daniel Jones and Geno Smith, I think they're both going to be in similar situations. And I also think this is going to be, going back to more Daniel Jones, this is probably going to be the route that I think you see a lot of teams take who draft first-round players and don't want to pick up the fifth-year option. They'll find themselves in that middle ground of, well, after 4 years, if they surprise us in year 4, we go ahead and we throw the tag on them. And yeah, it would have been cheaper to have the fifth-year option, but the reality is it doesn't have to be the exclusive franchise tag, which is going to be the most expensive option and all that. So I actually think the route that the Giants are going with Daniel Jones will be the more common route that most teams go, using the non-exclusive tag moving forward as opposed to that fifth-year option in some of those rookie deals.
Here's the other thing about those two. A year ago, if you would have said Daniel Jones and Geno Smith were going to be on the market, everybody would have said, oh, big deal, So that's where you got to be careful. If they both hit the market, what kind of deals would they get? I think that's a legitimate question. Who's paying either one of those a big money deal? I'm curious. Brady, you have any idea? Who would pay those guys?
I don't, because I think they've got a lot of competition. I think everyone's playing second fiddle to Aaron Rodgers, depending on where he'd want to be traded from the Green Bay Packers. Then you've got Derek Carr as a free agent. And then, in my opinion, a guy you've got ranked lower on your list is Jimmy Garoppolo. Say whatever you want about his injury history and age, but bottom line is when he goes in, his teams are competitive and they're usually winning football games. Look, Lamar Jackson's not going to become a free agent, so we don't even need to talk about him. But as far as Daniel Jones and Geno Smith go, I don't know that anyone's really going to be clamoring to go that route to sign either of these guys, as opposed to some of the other free agents that are either on this list or one of our teams that would rather look to the draft to be able to find that next quarterback.
All right, those are your quarterbacks in the top 100 of Pete Prisco's free agent rankings. How about a couple of safeties back-to-back in the teens? Jesse Bates behind Jordan Poyer. But we kind of talked about this with Geno Smith and Daniel Jones. You gave Jones the edge because he's younger. I'm a little bit surprised here. Bates is 6 years younger than Poyer. Poyer had injury issues last year. Why do you have him ahead of the younger player?
Poyer's a better player. I think when you watched Jesse Bates last year, I think he was impacted by the fact that he played on the franchise tag. Early in the season, he didn't play as well. Jesse Bates is a good player. He did not play as well early in the season. I think that impacted him. He got better as the season moved along. But when you look at the Bengals, they've drafted to replace him. Dax Hill was drafted to replace him, and I think he's going to end up being a guy that steps in there and plays for him. He will get on the free agent market. I think Poyer, the age is an issue, and he did miss a little time last year, but boy, when he was on the field, he was outstanding. He's a better football player than Jesse Bates right now, in my mind.
I think at this point in time in his career, he's probably had a better career, but I think Jesse Bates has more of the upside, and because of the youth, and obviously lack of injury history, is probably going to be the one that warrants a bigger deal in the free agent market. This was one of those that I was a bit surprised you had Poyer ahead of Bates, although they're one spot apart, so it's not that big of an issue. But again, the injury concerns for me and even age for Poyer, just two things that I think every team's going to be looking at them saying he's knocked down a peg and looking at what you're going to want to sign him to in a free agent deal considering his age and injury concerns.
Bates was one of the 4 players tagged last season. We just showed you that list. It included a couple of tight ends in Schultz and Gesicki. The top tight end in your list this year is Evan Engram, who had a career year with the Jacksonville Jaguars, a couple of games where he just exploded, and it happened late in the season. Seemed like a really good fit in Jacksonville. And
I think it's going to be a good enough fit that they're going to tag him. I mean, they'd be foolish not to tag him. And the franchise tag isn't that bad for the tight end. I think it's $11.5 million. So tag him and keep him. You have a young quarterback. You have a guy who's on the verge of being a star quarterback. Why weaken your team around him? Tag Evan Engram and then worry about signing Javon Taylor. That's what I would do. I think in the end, he's going to be back in Jacksonville at least on a 1-year deal. Maybe they do get an extension done.
I hope so, for the sake of Trevor Lawrence moving forward. I mean, he's a mismatch nightmare for teams, and I think they have a good chemistry with one another. So I think it makes a lot of sense moving forward. And I'm with you for all the reasons you just laid out, Pete. It's pretty economical to put a franchise tag on a tight end. That number's not that high. And it makes a lot of sense, I think, what the Jacksonville Jaguars would like to do moving forward. But if Evan Engram was to hit the free agent market, I think he'd be one of those players that would sign a pretty big deal, considering everyone's looking for that sort of mismatch, whether it's at a running back, wide receiver, tight end position, to be able to stress opposing defenses. Evan Engram has the ability to do that. We saw him do that this past year in Jacksonville. But I'm with you. I don't think he hits the free agent market.
Speaking of running backs, the top running back in Pete's top 100 was Saquon Barkley at number 5. Just inside the top 40, you have Tony Pollard. How much higher would he be if he wasn't coming off the broken leg?
He'd be a little bit higher. I mean, look, he'd probably be in the 30s, not that much higher. But here's a guy, he's a game changer. He does so many different things. And at times, you felt like he should have been on the field more for the Dallas Cowboys. As the season moved along, he was on the field more than Zeke Elliott. He's a better player right now. The leg is a concern. I know it's not a knee injury, but it is a broken lower leg, and that is always a concern when it's a running back. There's talk that they're going to tag him. That will be interesting to see if that does indeed get done. $10.5 million for the tag, but I think they'll find a way to try and keep Tony Pollard. They love him. He's a big part of what they do.
Pete, this is another one I was surprised he was as low on your list. I thought chalking it up to a running back, maybe the injury, but he's the type of player, given his youth and I think given his burst and home run hitting ability, a lot of teams would love to see him hit the free agent market and then put him in a variety of places where he could help out their offense and creating more explosives for them. So I'm a big Tony Pollard fan. I'm with you, though. I think the Cowboys would like him not to end up becoming a free agent, so they'll probably use the tag on him. And if anything, it could be Zeke Elliott, who ends up being potentially released and ends up becoming a free agent hitting the market, not Tony Pollard.
We're in the tag window right now in the NFL until March the 7th, which is 12 days away. We've got the Combine coming up and the draft. 9 weeks from tonight, our new podcast with the first pick, Rick Spielman, Ryan Wilson. Latest episode discussing whether or not it's feasible that the Bears trade Justin Fields and draft a quarterback number 1.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.